Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Police tried to stop him. He didn't listen, so they shooted.
Vancouver police shoot and kill a suspect after 2 people are wounded downtown.
Police actions will be part of the IO's investigation.
Plus,
It's actually supporting a very good cause, something that Taylor Swift also supports as well.
a federal cabinet minister defends his decision to accept taxpayer-funded tickets to Taylor Swift in Vancouver after donating to a local food bank.
He should just be buying his own tickets.
And
they're not canceling the project. They're pausing the contract.
a $1 billion battery plant expansion in Maple Ridge is on hold as the company focuses on production in Taiwan.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. It was a violent day in downtown Vancouver. Police say they shot and killed a suspect after a robbery in which 2 other people were hurt. As Michelle Gassoub explains, it's the latest in a series of violent incidents in the downtown core.
Move over! Right now! Move over!
Scary moments at the intersection of Robson and Hamilton, just 2 blocks from BC Place. A man allegedly stabbed one person and injured another inside this 7-Eleven before being shot by police.
It's really terrible. I am just doing my part-time job.
This witness was on his way inside the store and took this video of the incident. He says the man was agitated and tried to steal cigarettes.
And he just bring out his knife. They just said, you can take whatever you want, but he didn't listen. He tries to stab that lady inside and him. Then police came and police tried to stop him. He didn't listen, so they shooted.
In the video, police appear to fire 9 shots. BC's police watchdog says the suspect suffered a gunshot-related injury and later died in hospital. Police said the man first stole alcohol from the original Joe's across the street and was armed with a knife inside that restaurant before heading to the 7-Eleven.
It's unfortunate that 2 people were injured and that a man was shot by our officers, but because of our immediate response, we were able to stop that threat to the public.
Police wouldn't confirm whether those injured were employees of the 7-Eleven or whether the suspect was known to police.
The person that was stabbed had stab wounds to their hand, and the other person has facial injuries.
Eyewitnesses said they saw tasers being used. Those details are now being investigated. In September, a man was stabbed to death. Another had his hand cut off just 2 blocks from this intersection. The incident raising concerns about safety in central parts of downtown, set to host thousands of Taylor Swift fans Friday through Sunday.
And of course, we also want to protect the residents from the area for people who might be a danger to community. So obviously, we're talking with the community groups.
The Independent Investigations Office now looking into what happened before and during the shooting and what role police played. Michelle Gassoub, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we have an update on a story about an alleged sucker punch in downtown. From last week, it was in fact last Thursday, Vancouver police released video of a man suddenly punching another man as he was walking on West Georgia Street, then ran away. Police say they have now arrested a suspect and he's remaining in jail on other charges. Federal Cabinet Minister and Vancouver MP Harjit Sajjan is defending his decision to accept taxpayer-funded Taylor Swift tickets for himself and his daughter. As Katie DeRosa reports, while he says he cleared it with the Ethics Commissioner, other politicians did not accept the offer.
They're the hottest tickets in town, a chance to see Taylor Swift play at Vancouver's BC Place. But should politicians be accepting free tickets to the show, especially if the taxpayer is footing the bill?
That's the situation that's placed one federal cabinet minister and Vancouver MP in hot water. Harjit Sajjan, the minister responsible for the Pacific Economic Development Agency of Canada, is going to the concert Saturday with his daughter. They're guests of Pavco, the company that operates BC Place, a stadium owned by the province. While Sajjan isn't breaking any rules, critics say the optics are not good.
If politicians want to go see a concert like Taylor Swift with their children, they should be paying out of pocket.
I don't think this is the end of Canadian political ethics, but I think this was just a bad judgment call.
PAVCO invited 40 guests for each of the 3 concerts, including business partners, government and elected officials, First Nations, community groups, and charities. The company says all guests were asked to make a significant donation to the Greater Vancouver Food Banks and Food Banks of BC in exchange for the free ticket. Sajjan said he donated $1,500 to the food bank in exchange for the tickets.
This is actually supporting a very good cause, something that Taylor Swift also supports as well. So here's the thing though, this is actually what it is about. It's actually raising money for the food bank, something that I do every single year. And I'm actually very happy to be able to raise money and create greater awareness for the food bank.
He had bought tickets to Swift's concert last month in Toronto, but sold those for face value. The Office of the Federal Ethics Commissioner confirmed to CBC News that the minister contacted them about the free tickets. Since Sajjan donated to the food bank, the office says the tickets are not considered a gift under the Conflict of Interest Act. Despite that, Sajjan's political rivals say it wasn't the right call.
Is concerning, and it shows a lack of judgment.
Look, it's absolutely unacceptable that a minister of the Crown is accepting free concert tickets.
Spokespeople for Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim, Premier David Eby, and Tourism Minister Spencer Shander Herbert all said the politicians turned down offers of free tickets. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
A $1 billion battery plant expansion in Maple Ridge is on pause because of changing market conditions. The province and Ottawa earmarked $200 million for the project last year. As John Hernandez explains, it was expected to bring in hundreds of jobs.
The Prime Minister and the Premier called it a big deal 1 year ago.
We are charting a course in Canada and internationally.
But what was once dubbed the future of Canada's energy sector is now far from certain. The E1 lithium battery plant in Maple Ridge was announced last November, poised to be the largest manufacturer of its kind in Canada, an expansion of an already existing facility in the city. But company executives confirmed it's on pause due to changing market conditions. Its Taiwan-based parent company will instead focus on manufacturing batteries overseas.
They're not canceling the project. They're pausing the contract. As with most projects of these sizes, you're always going to go back and evaluate what is going on.
Maple Ridge Mayor Dan Rumi is trying to be optimistic. Hundreds of jobs in his city hang in the balance.
We're here to make sure that we're doing everything we can through the permitting process and making sure that they have everything they need from the city because we want them to be here.
Ottawa pledged $200 million to E1, BC another $80 million. Those dollars have yet to be sent over to the company. Officials are calling it a slight adjustment to the market.
When you have adjustment on consumer habits, on supply chain, on technology, having slight readjustments is something that we've seen.
But this isn't the only clean energy project in BC that's now pumping the brakes. Just weeks ago, a massive hydrogen project in Prince George was put on hold, with project leaders saying it was no longer commercially viable. Economists warn the market is already overcrowded.
And so for somebody to come in with yet another plant in the next few years, it would enter into a very uncertain market.
Clean energy uncertainty that experts say is also fueled by Canada's looming federal election and a changing government just south of the border. John Hernandez, CBC News, Maple Ridge.
A new report is calling on the BC government to do more to protect women fleeing abusive relationships, especially when abusers violate restraining orders. As Katie DeRosa reports, violence against women is rising, and advocates call it an epidemic.
Stephanie Forster did everything she could to keep herself safe from her ex-husband, who was stalking her. She got a restraining order, changed her phone number, and moved 3 times. She asked police to search her car for tracking devices after she found an Apple AirTag hidden in the vehicle. It wasn't enough. The 39-year-old was shot and killed outside her Coquitlam home on December 8, 2022. The main suspect, her estranged husband, Gianluigi De Rossi, fatally shot himself when his vehicle was pulled over by the police 2 days later. Anti-violence advocates say her case highlights the gaps in the system when it comes to restraining orders, known in the legal system as protection orders.
She went through the police, she went through the family law system. She had a family law protection order in place at the time. She had breaches on record with the Coquitlam RCMP, at least 3 that we're aware of, and he still killed her.
A new report from the Battered Women's Support Services find there's often few consequences when abusive partners breach those protection orders.
Often when perpetrators breach those peace bonds or the conditions that are outlined of no contact directly or indirectly, we find that the system is not enforcing those breaches.
Forster was one of 24 women killed by men in BC in 2022, a rate that's doubled in the last decade.
That number is only escalating. 1 is too many, 24 is a crisis.
The advocacy group is calling for mandatory coroner's inquests into femicide deaths, particularly in cases where a protection order was sought. They also want to see mandatory arrests for abusers who breach the protection order. Attorney General Nikki Sharma says the report raises serious issues, which will be addressed through an ongoing systemic review into the way the legal system treats victims of sexual and intimate partner violence.
You know, it's shocking to hear that when somebody has sought out a restraining order and a family law order in some of the cases they're talking about, they think they have the protection of the law against that violent partner, and then the examples I gave of resulting in murder, that's concerning.
Former NDP MLA Katrina Chen is a survivor of gender-based violence. It's why she signed a letter sent to the Premier calling for the government to declare gender-based violence an epidemic. The letter was sent as part of an awareness campaign from the YWCA of Metro Vancouver.
Call it an epidemic, call it for what it is, and then take the actions to help them through their journey to recovery, to healing, at the same time to prevent violence and break that cycle of violence from happening again and again to women and girls.
Sharma did not commit to calling gender-based violence an epidemic, saying she wants to wait until the review is complete next year. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
More than 3 years have passed since an atmospheric river drenched the south coast and parts of the interior, triggering devastating floods from the Nicola Valley through Princeton to the Fraser Valley. Despite promises of federal aid, many communities are still waiting for cash to repair, rebuild, and mitigate future climate change disasters. As Tom Popek explains, some people are still out in the cold.
Pull it in.
The door frame warped.
Because it's still not totally even, the trailer.
Joanne Street's mobile home remains damaged by the 2021 floods. Her life swept away.
Yeah, so not being able to be back in here, like I felt safe here.
This home, like some 50 others in Merritt, still unlivable.
I've learned not to get my hopes up too high. You know, don't want to set myself up for disappointment or anything, but to not be able to live back in my home is, yeah, it's really disappointing and hard.
The cause and problem is just 50 meters away. 3 years ago, Merritt's rivers burst their banks, raging through the streets and forcing some 7,000 residents to flee their homes. Some have rebuilt, but the levee and dike system remains unrepaired despite federal promises for funding.
We were denied, Princeton was denied, Abbotsford was denied. And the only people that got money was Prince Rupert. And Prince Rupert got $187 million to fix a in-the-ground sewer system, which is a capital project. That's not a disaster.
Getz says eastern provinces received most of Ottawa's 2021 $1.5 billion disaster mitigation budget. The federal emergency aid package for the BC flooding is estimated to cost $3.4 billion, but only 40% has been paid out. Some Princeton neighborhoods remain under boil water orders. Until Merritt's dikes are rebuilt, some 1,300 homes remain at risk in that flood zone, including the mayor's. But Joanne is getting a lift.
We've just decided that she needs to get back to her life, and we need to help her get there.
The city is now working to move her trailer from the river's edge, waiving all municipal costs.
Yeah, and one day it did dawn on me that I still have these hearts in the window, and I was going to take them down, and I just thought, no, because, you know, there's a lot of love in that home, and there's, like, still hope.
After struggling more than 3 years, Joanne Street is finally finding solid ground.
That could be the new home.
Tom Popek, CBC News, Kelowna.
There are two weather terms often bandied about, but what do they actually mean? La Nina and El Nino are often blamed for weather patterns. Darius Madavi will break down how it all works right after this.
This is Vancouver is a new CBC podcast where we explore the issues, the stories, and the people that make this place home. Listen to This is Vancouver wherever you get your podcasts.
Ski hills in BC have been opening early this season with plenty of snow and cold temperatures. There's been some chatter about it being a La Nina year. What is this weather phenomenon then? And what makes it different than its alleged winter sibling El Nino? Darius Badavi breaks it down.
This is the most misunderstood patch of ocean in the world. Here, El Nino and La Nina are born and die in an endless cycle. Here, just 1% of the Earth's surface shapes the weather around the globe, and often it takes the blame for it.
I've been hearing it's going to be a La Nina year instead of El Nino, which we had last year, so really looking forward to the year.
It's off-season around this time. There's no snow at all.
The La Nina, and even though it's a mild one, we're still expecting to be significantly better than last year. Lots of challenges last year.
It's probably one of the best opening days we've had in about 2 or 3 years.
A miserable ski season in North America? That's gotta be El Nino. Intense hurricanes in the Atlantic? It's a La Nina year. You'll hear the same about widespread flooding in Africa, a historic drought in Australia, a bad year for fishers in South America, even reduced sea ice in Antarctica. So, are the accusations fair? And if they are, how is this possible? Here on the West Coast, when people hear La Nina, their first thought is often good ski season. And typically, that's true. Data shows that many West Coast mountains can expect an extra foot of snow in the average La Nina winter. But the story doesn't end there, because in the weak La Nina years, a large section of BC's coast can actually expect way less snow than in a typical year. An area which includes the biggest ski resort in North America, Whistler Blackcomb. So what is a weak La Nina anyway? To answer that, we have to go back to that little patch of the Pacific where El Nino and La Nina form. This area is called ENSO 3.4. ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, is one of the most important natural climate patterns on our planet. Most often, we're in ENSO neutral, neither El Nino nor La Nina. But when warmer conditions spread across this part of the Pacific, we enter El Nino. When the opposite happens and it's cooler than normal, we enter La Nina. Different countries have different official criteria, but looking at that patch of the Pacific is generally the most reliable measure. El Nino and La Nina events typically occur every 2 to 7 years. The keyword being typically. Swings between them are irregular and hard to predict. And not every event is created equal. They usually last 9 to 12 months, but sometimes stick around for years. And just knowing we're in, say, a La Nina isn't enough. Is it weak, moderate, strong? That's key information when forecasting everything from the hurricane season in the Atlantic to, as we saw earlier, the ski season on the West Coast. But why? How does the ocean temperature in a remote patch of the Pacific cause knock-on effects around the world? We don't actually know what kicks it off, but once it gets going, it's hard to stop. Let's go back to our little patch of the Pacific. In the tropics, we have the trade winds, which usually blow from east to west. In La Nina years, those winds strengthen, pushing warm waters further west and allowing cold water to come to the surface in the eastern Pacific. During an El Nino, the trade winds weaken or even reverse, meaning warm surface waters are further east than normal. Whether it's an El Nino or a La Nina forming, the changes to the ocean and the atmosphere feed into one another, causing a sort of feedback loop, driving us further and further into that climate pattern, which can eventually lead to huge knock-on effects that can be felt around the world. But remember, these are just trends. They aren't hard and fast rules. And yes, El Nino and La Nina are powerful drivers of the global climate, but they aren't the only ones. Remember those maps of snowfall trends in La Nina years? Well, take a look at this one. Across most of North America, snowfall rates are falling rapidly due to climate change. And there's some evidence that climate change is interacting with ENSO swings as well, making them stronger and more dramatic. Although, admittedly, that idea is a hot topic of debate among climate scientists. So, to sum up, El Nino should not be the global climate boogeyman, and La Nina isn't the ski season savior. These are natural and unpredictable patterns that can give us a sense of what might be expected each season. But just a sense, so be skeptical of anyone pulling out these terms with no explanation. Darius Madavi, CBC News, Vancouver.
The day that was in Vancouver, where fog descended on our region once again, but the mist is about to end. Darius has your BC-wide weather forecast coming up. Well, hundreds of fans have been lining up at Canada Place to get their hands on, you guessed it, Taylor Swift merchandise ahead of her hugely anticipated tour dates here in Vancouver.
Look at this shirt. Very nice, has all the dates. And then we got the most amazing item that everyone's trying to get.
The blue crew necks.
Yeah.
Blue crew neck, naturally. This must-have item, the sweater, only available in stores when her tour is actually in town. If you're heading to one of the shows but can't make it downtown, you can also pick up tour merch inside BC Place. Now, tens of thousands of fans will be bound for the stadium starting on Friday as Taylor Swift takes the stage for the first of 3 sold-out performances. To get all those people to and from the show, TransLink is expanding and extending service. For more on that, we're joined by spokesperson Tina Lovegreen. Good to see you, Tina. Thanks for being here. 160,000 people expected to travel downtown this weekend. How are they going to get around? What are you offering?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are no strangers to moving large crowds. We do this for other concerts, hockey games, and so we're really prepared for all this. We've done a lot of homework. We've spoken to peer transit agencies like our colleagues in Toronto to really prepare for what's to come. And so it's about extending service hours, maximizing capacity, and making sure that there's lots of staff on the ground to help people. We know a lot of people are coming from out of town, maybe never been to our city, never been on our transit system. So we're there. We're going to have big signs with, do you have questions? Do you need directions? You'll see people in high visibility vests. So really helping people to get to where they need to go and manage the crowds.
Great. And just remind us, when are the latest to and from, for example, SkyTrain?
Yeah, great question. So for SkyTrain, it's going to be extended for the hours for all 3 nights. So if you're catching the Canada line, let's say from Waterfront, the last train will leave at 1:15 a.m. and 1:16 a.m. for Waterfront on the Expo line. So lots of room there. If you are taking the C bus and going to the North Shore, that's also going to be extended until 1:22 a.m. on all 3 nights. And we're also increasing frequency on the C bus. So there'll be sailings every 10 minutes to help get crowds moving starting at 3 p.m.
Okay. And does that go the same for some of the bus routes?
Yes. So the buses, they're a bit more nimble. And so we're going to have transit supervisors out and about. And if they see crowding, they'll just kind of call in the buses and shuttle them out of there. And so for specifically after the concert, we're going to have special shuttle buses to get people from BC Place to Waterfront Station so they can move along and catch our special Rogers West Coast Express train, which is running on this Saturday. That's going to get people down from Mission at 4 o'clock and then return at midnight. So a lot of different options, and really taking transit is the most convenient and easiest way to get around.
This city is no stranger to big events. We've done this in the past. Why was it important this time for TransLink to extend service?
Yeah, I mean, we expect, people to be coming from out of town, and we know that they're staying in different parts of the city, so not just in downtown Vancouver, but maybe a little further out. So making sure that we're providing service to match where they need to go is really important. We don't want to leave people behind. And also we're seeing other organizations extend, for example, BC Ferries extending their sailings. So we need to be able to provide a service to get to those sailings as well. So really just making sure that it's a fun experience and it's a positive experience for all.
All right. Tina Lovegreen with TransLink, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
No worries. Before I leave, I do have a friendship bracelet for you.
Thank you very much.
So.
Good. I have a Casio, but I'm not really willing to give this up.
It.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Air Canada is grounding free carry-on bags for its cheapest tickets, forcing customers to now pay for checked luggage. As Nisha Patel tells us, it comes as other countries are cracking down on airline fees.
Carry-on bags used to be free. Soon, some of the cheapest Air Canada tickets won't allow carry-on at all.
It defeats the purpose of the economy ticket.
I don't agree with that because you pay enough for the fare to begin with.
Starting January 3rd, passengers who book a basic economy fare on some routes will only be allowed one personal item, like a purse or a laptop bag. Anything larger must be checked before security for $35. At the gate, that cost goes up to $65.
North American carriers in particular are doing this in order to be able to offer a range of alternatives to customers.
Earlier this year, WestJet announced an ultra-basic ticket with no carry-ons. Porter, Flair, and Sunwing have similar fare options. Air Canada is also adding a new fee. Basic fare passengers will be automatically assigned a seat and will have to pay if they want to change it. This airline expert thinks the industry is pushing it.
This is big dollars. This is part of a multi-billion-dollar basket of revenues that we call ancillary fees, and the airlines know there's no additional cost.
Around the world, regulators are taking notice. U.S. senators grilled officials from 5 airlines Wednesday, calling their fees unfair.
The current practices, they simply won't fly anymore.
In November, the Spanish government said carry-on bag charges violated consumers' rights and fined several budget airlines nearly $200 million.
I think that the time has come for Canadians to kind of say enough is enough.
After Air Canada's announcement, Transport Minister Anita Anand wrote that she was extremely concerned. The concern for passengers, what will they be charged for next? Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
Assembly of First Nations chiefs from across the country are gathered in Ottawa this week. The focus is on how to renegotiate a deal with the federal government to reform the First Nations child welfare system. But the deal continues to face fierce opposition. And as Olivia Stefanovich reports, time is running out to secure a new deal before the next federal election.
Since the very moment this assembly started, it was clear children would be the focus.
Because too many First Nations children continue to be taken from their families and their communities.
But a debate over what's in the best interest of First Nations children continues.
The next iteration of the long-term agreement really has to show how Canada is going to change its ways to ensure discrimination doesn't happen again. The last agreement fell far short of that as well.
Ottawa is offering $47.8 billion to reform the on-reserve child welfare system, a deal negotiated and endorsed by AFN leadership. Money meant to keep parents and their children together by ensuring a roof over their heads, food on the table, and having counseling services available.
I really supported this because I need some financial resources and help create our own prevention program and child and family services in the community.
So he's defeated.
But back in October, AFN members resoundingly rejected Ottawa's multi-billion-dollar offer, following concerns funding would only be guaranteed for 10 years and because children and families living off reserve are excluded.
For them not to be compensated is it's discrimination at its finest.
This First Nations leader says the federal government needs to send the deal back to the drawing board.
It would be nice to get the settlement done completely right away, but it doesn't work like that. There's a lot of gaps in the system that they haven't really fixed.
I just see this ending up in court if this AFN tries to push this long-term reform.
Some chiefs are so upset with the leadership, they're calling for the AFN to be dissolved altogether.
We need to really consider revisiting the organization. I call it an organization because it does not have the right to speak on our behalf.
The AFN only has one more day left of meetings this week to make a decision about child welfare reform, and less than a year to secure the money with this Liberal government. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
The fallout after a surprise move by the Korean president to declare martial law, the latest in what's been a tumultuous political year in South Korea. We break down the story from handbags to green onions. Stick around. Environment Canada's seasonal forecast says a warmer and wetter December may be kicking off winter in western and northwestern Canada.
La Nina winters do tend to bring more precipitation to the western provinces, particularly around the Rockies. But that is not an especially strong tendency. It's a sort of a bit of a tilting of the odds.
Going into January and February, the region might be slightly colder than average, caused by cold and wet conditions brought in by warmer than usual sea surface temperatures and a weak La Nina in the Pacific Ocean. And Darius Madavi is here, fresh from telling us all about El Nino and La Nina with our big BC-wide weather forecast.
Yes, and I would like to emphasize that we are not in a La Nina yet. We are trending towards it, but we may or may not hit it this year. If we do, it'll be a weak La Nina. And also something Environment Canada mentioned that we didn't see in that clip. There's another factor here that I'm not showing here, but the Pacific Decadal Oscillation is another sort of cyclical weather pattern that happens up in the northern Pacific instead, and that is in a very strong negative phase right now, which also tends to bring cold and wet winters to the west coast. So that is another thing that could be affecting our weather this winter, but again, it's a seasonal forecast. Don't plan your life around it, is what I would say. I want to talk about all the fog that we've been seeing here on the south coast lately. We've got that marine layer trapped down here at the surface. We've had a ridge of high pressure build in over BC. This graphic actually doesn't show the fog all that well. We've had a ridge of high pressure build in, though. It's been sitting over us. When that happens in the summer, that means sunny, warm conditions, but in the wintertime, that lets that marine layer get trapped down below some warmer air up top. There just isn't enough sunlight to cause that mixing in the atmosphere to get that marine layer away from the surface, and that means a heck of a lot of fog. But that is going to change soon. That ridge of high pressure that we've had built in is going to leave soon. That is going to change temperatures across BC significantly, as well as bringing some more rain into our part of the province. You may have noticed the spout of precipitation was sort of plugged the last few days. We're not going to see that sort of stream of moisture consistently, but a series of systems are going to roll into the coast, starting up in the northwest and then slowly working their way down to us here on the south coast, probably late in the day on Friday into Saturday. Maybe Friday evening, we'll see that start, really. Most of that is going to come down as snow up in the north. This was actually what fell today. Northeast, not really expecting to see too much more snow in the near future. And then the northwest, we can see that all coming down the north coast. But the south coast, freezing levels are high enough that we aren't really going to see much snow. Expect to see a lot of rain on top of all that snow that we've seen at those higher elevations in the last couple weeks. So freezing levels staying quite high over the next few days and then start to come down early next week. Conditions across the province tomorrow, one thing to highlight up in the northwest, getting some freezing rain. Other than that, the odd shower in many places. That rain starting again up in the northwest and then working its way down south. And that means here in Vancouver, we have one more day of fog while that ridge of high pressure is still in place. And as that starts to break down, we'll start to see some cloudier conditions. Well, continue to see cloudy conditions. Then some showers, some wind, and eventually some sunshine again and some very cold nights.
Okay. Thanks very much, Darius.
Thank you.
The day after a brief attempt to bring in martial law in South Korea, the president is under attack, from both his foes and allies. The defense minister has resigned, saying he takes the blame. But President Yoon is also being pushed to step down or face impeachment. As Andrew Chang explains, it's just the latest in a wild year of South Korean politics.
Late night TV in South Korea very suddenly became very serious.
I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces.
South Korea's president declared martial law, basically in the middle of the night, effectively accusing the opposition of trying to destroy the country from within.
I have to stress that this is a shocking development. Nobody expected that.
We understand that it would prohibit political activity.
Protests are prohibited and the media is censored.
It was a complete shock. I don't think any Koreans would accept that.
The president says the opposition is undermining core functions of government, turning the country into a drug haven, putting public safety into a state of chaos. These are all his words, not mine.
I will definitely eradicate the anti-state forces who are the main culprit of the country's ruination and conduct vicious activities.
And then, almost as quickly as the declaration had been made, Parliament, including members of the president's own party, pulled the rug out from under him, reversing the call.
South Korean lawmakers were able to convene tonight and vote unanimously.
Martial law and military rule declared by President Yoon earlier in the day have now been lifted.
A lot of people are scratching their heads, and there's a big question mark. Why the president, made this, announcement?
The more I read into this story, I very quickly realized that this is just the latest in a series of bizarre events in South Korean politics. Because for years, the land of Samsung and semiconductors has been locked into an all-out political war, with the president repeatedly facing impeachment, an opposition leader who was nearly killed by being stabbed in the neck, a parliament unable to agree on a path forward, and somehow this also involves a very expensive Dior handbag and green onions. Lots of green onions. Let's dive in. When South Korea's president made an offhand remark about produce at a grocery store, he had no idea how such a small thing would spin out of control. President Yoon Suk-yeol visited a food market and marveled at how reasonably priced the spring onions were. And they were, something like 875 won, or about 86 cents in today's Canadian dollars. But this was a heavily discounted price because of a government subsidy, and green onions were normally 3, 4, 5 times that price. All food in South Korea has become increasingly expensive, and this quip from the president felt, to many voters, hopelessly out of touch.
Opposition candidates started bringing spring onions to election rallies and accusing the president of being out of touch with reality.
Powerful symbol, those green onions. And ahead of an election, voters had a clear outlet for their anger.
He had the narrowest margin of victory in the history of the vote by less than 1%.
And he actually enters office with the lowest approval rating of any new president here in South Korea.
The 2022 election that saw Yoon narrowly win the presidency was also a crushing defeat. His opponents won parliament, and that all but neutralized any hope of achieving the agenda that he had laid out. Now, to be sure, of course, this wasn't just about green onions, but even in the most recent elections, this past April, the opposition increased their majority. Yoon's party leader resigned. The prime minister offered to do the same, and South Korean politics would become so bitter that on the very day marking the reopening of parliament this past September, Yoon just refused to show up. A president failing to attend the opening of parliament? That hadn't happened in 30 plus years. But Yoon was frustrated. Calls for his impeachment had been building momentum. Here's a petition dated just a couple of months after the most recent elections, 2 years since Yoon took office. It's in Korean, but 2 things I'll point out. These characters here, 탄핵, that's Korean for impeachment. But importantly, look at how many people signed. More than 1.4 million people.
The president is deeply unpopular and has been unwilling to compromise to deal with the opposition and to focus on cost of living issues that a majority of Koreans are worried about.
He's been facing so many calls for impeachment, not only from the public, but from other politicians. And this was actually something that he had cited in his reasoning for declaring martial law.
Yoon saw this as the opposition weaponizing its majority, weaponizing the system against him and eventually his wife, too.
Now, the bag scandal, as the incident is being called, is sending shockwaves through President Yoon Suk-yeol's administration.
A scandal erupted when Yoon's wife was captured with a hidden camera accepting a Dior handbag as a gift. This, under South Korean law, is illegal because public officials and their spouses can't accept gifts worth more than $750 US. She was interrogated by prosecutors. The president apologized for her error, even called it reckless, but accused the opposition of blowing the whole thing out of proportion.
First Lady Kim Gon-hee received a Dior handbag, which led to accusations of violating the anti-corruption law.
President Yoon was a prosecutor for 25 years. He's supposed to be really tough on corruption and on crime. But of course, he's also extremely wealthy. And his answer to those allegations was that she behaved badly, right? So he dismissed it. He didn't take it seriously.
The opposition, by the way, has had problems of their own. And it was earlier this year, the opposition leader only barely survived an attempt on his life. This summer, a man was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempting to kill opposition leader Lee Jae-myung. He was apparently pretending to ask for an autograph, but instead, and just a warning, you're going to see it happen here, he lunges at Lee with a knife, stabbing him in the neck. Lee needed surgery, was in hospital for 8 days. He survived, but almost a full year later, he'd face a different sort of reckoning. A 1-year prison term for making false statements before the 2022 elections. But he would claim, in effect, what the president has claimed, that the system was being weaponized against him. In a statement online, his party wrote, "Today's first trial verdict is clearly a political verdict," and that this was an attempt by the Yoon administration to eliminate its political enemies. The opposition leader plans to appeal, but this is how polarized politics have become in South Korea. It's all personal.
South Korea historically, certainly for the last 40 plus years, has been seen as a strong liberal democracy in Asia. It's obviously a sign of the times that we're living in terms of disinformation, polarization, and divisions within democracies.
Starting out the year with an assassination attempt, I think really highlighted the discontent with politicians in general that we are seeing in South Korea.
But even after all this, it seems the direct trigger for Yoon declaring martial law is something else altogether, an impasse in parliament over his party's budget. The opposition wanted to slash trillions of won, that's equal to billions of Canadian dollars, out of the budget. And because the opposition has a majority, they were looking to force their amendments through. The parliamentary speaker has urged both parties to come to an agreement by next week. But it doesn't seem like the president sees a path forward.
President Yoon's speech declaring martial law also used some really inflammatory language, accusing the opposition of being essentially working in collaboration with North Korean communists and being enemies of the state. The opposition has made it clear that the president and the party are incompetent, that they're corrupt, that they're elite, and they have been calling for them to step down and to essentially call for fresh elections.
As Yoon himself faces accusations of corruption and being unfit to lead, he sees the opposition and its majority as tyrannical, putting the country on a dangerous path. But his problem is his own party, too.
The National Assembly demanded the lifting of martial law, so the troops deployed for martial law affairs were withdrawn. Martial law will be lifted immediately by accepting the National Assembly's request through a state council meeting.
Over the course of a few hours, he declared martial law, sent South Koreans and the world into a confused frenzy, and then backtracked on it. So not a good look for him.
The president appears increasingly isolated. His last-ditch effort to grab hold of the reins of power rebuffed by his own party allies. His approval ratings have never been lower, and now it's not clear what, if any, agency or legitimacy the president has left.
Festive cheer is in the air, and the Lonsdale Shipyards is bringing another European-style Christmas to Metro Vancouver. More on how they're celebrating the season after this. Oh, the festive spirit is in the air, and to spread the cheer, the North Vancouver Shipyards is hosting its first Christmas market in full European style.
It'll have food and drink from around the continent, local vendors, and it's free to enter. Our Caroline Chan went across the water to check it out.
The holiday spirit has arrived at the shipyards in North Vancouver in the form of a Christmas market. It's the first year they're doing it. Organizer John Van Rye says the idea behind it is simple.
We really wanted to come back and offer something that people can actually celebrate Christmas and without spending all that money. We really wanted to make sure that it was just not a German market. Christmas is obviously celebrated throughout Europe with different flares. And so we really wanted to bring, especially on the food side, we wanted to bring French food, Hungarian, Spanish, Italian, and I think we kind of managed that.
Here you'll find entertainment with a focus on BC artists. Live shows play every night.
Bon appétit, enjoy, Merry Christmas. Thank you.
There's also food stalls where you can sample poffages and chimney cakes, or if you're more into savory fare, raclette and bratwurst. And don't worry, it can't be a market without vendors. All the vendors are local or from around the province. To keep operating costs down, the shipyard's Christmas market is relying on volunteers. Why did you want to volunteer?
I just thought it was a great idea, and it was a great way to get into the spirit of the season. And I love what Aaron and John have developed here. They've taken something out of Europe, an idea out of Europe where families come down. The whole place is licensed, so you're wandering around with glühwein and spiced apple cider and beer like next door and just having a really good time. And I think that spirit is really important.
Admission to the shipyard's Christmas market is free, and it runs every day up to Christmas Eve. Caroline Chan, CBC News, North Vancouver.
Free entry, beer and bratwurst? Mm-hmm. Okay, count me in.
And glühwein.
And glühwein.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they have the, what is it? Für Zangenbola.
It's a throwback to a story from weeks ago.
Which also happened to feature a European-style Christmas market.
Mm-hmm.
Shocking.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, as well as on YouTube, and our website, cbc.ca/BC.
And we'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.